But on April 28, when the Rainsdock firm announced that about 8,000 carcasses had been collected, the fear in the city was at its peak. Radical measures were called for, authorities were accused, and a few families with homes on the coast spoke of the relocation. Move out there. But the next day, the news agency reported that the phenomenon had stopped abruptly and that the rat extermination agency had picked up only a negligible number of rats. The city sighed. But that same day, at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, when he was parked in front of the house, Dr. Ryu suddenly saw the old gatekeeper from the end of the street walking with difficulty, his head bowed, his arms and legs spread wide, his posture like puppets. The old man took the arm of a priest whom the doctor immediately recognized. A couple of times he met Father Panelu, a learned and enthusiastic Catholic missionary who was loved by everyone in the city, even those who were indifferent to religion. He waited for the two to come. Old Meeson, his eyes glittering and his breath hissing. He felt uncomfortable and wanted to go out and get some fresh air. But hearing severe pain in his neck, armpits and groin, he was forced to go back and ask Father Panelu to help him. "Those are lumps," he said. "I have to work hard to get on my feet." Sticking his arm out the window, the doctor felt the bottom of Meeson's neck, where a lump like a wooden eye emerged. He went to bed, and Thermocouple, I will visit this afternoon. After the old man at the gate had left, Rio asked Father Panelu what he thought of the rat thing. "Oh, it must have been a plague," said Panelu, and his eyes narrowed like a smile behind round glasses. After lunch, Rio was rereading a telegram from the nursing home announcing his wife's arrival when suddenly the phone rang. An old patient, a City Hall employee called him. He self-diagnosed aortic ligation a long time ago, but because he was poor, Rio did not pay for the treatment. "Yes," he said, "the doctor remembers me. But today is another patient. Call the doctor quickly, something happened at my neighbor's house," he said breathless. Rio thought of the old man at the gate and decided to come and visit. A few minutes later he knocked on the door of a small room on Federb Street, in the suburbs. Reaching the middle of the damp and smelly stairs, he met Joseph Gran coming down to meet him. A man in his 50s, with a colored mustache. Hung, tall and hunchbacked, narrow shoulders, thin limbs. "I am better now," he said as he walked up to Rio, "but just now I thought he was dead." He blew his nose. Up to the third and final floor, Rio saw on the left door the words written in red chalk. "Come in, I've been hanged." Two people enter the house. A rope hangs over an overturned recliner, and a table is pushed into a corner. The rope dangled in the air. "I pulled him out just in time," said Gran as if searching for words, though he used very simple words. Simple. "Right when I came out of the house and heard the noise. When I saw the words written on the door, I don't know how to tell you, I suspect it's a joke." But he groaned in an unusual and even tragic way. He scratched his head. "I think it must have been painful for him to hang his neck like that. Of course I went in." The two pushed open a door and stood in front of a bright but poorly furnished room. A small and fat man lay on a copper-plated iron bed. He gasped and looked at them with bloodshot eyes. Dr. Ryu stopped. Between breaths, he seemed to hear a mouse chirping. But in the four corners of the room, nothing moved. Rio walked over to the bed. He did not fall from too high and not suddenly, the vertebrae were fine. Of course there is a bit of suffocation. He'll have to take an X-ray. The doctor gave him a shot of camphor oil and said in a few days everything would be fine. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his voice breathless. Rio asked Gran if he had reported to the police station. He replied, confused. "No, oh no. I think the most urgent is..." Of course, Rio interrupted him, "I'll tell you so." But then the sick man stirred and sat up. He said he was fine and didn't need to be reported. "Don't worry," said Rio, "it doesn't matter, believe me, and I have to report it." "Oh," he exclaimed. Then leaned back and sobbed. Beating his mustache for a moment, Gran approached him and said, "Mr. Kata, you sympathize. The doctor is responsible for this. If, for example, he intends to do it again." But Kata wept and said he wouldn't do it again. This was just a moment of madness and he just wanted people to leave him alone. Ryu wrote the prescription. "All right," he said. "Put that aside, I'll be back in a few days. But do not do foolish things anymore." On the stairs, Rio told Gran that he had to make a statement, but that he would ask the police department 2 days later to open an investigation. "You have to keep an eye on him tonight. Does he have a family?" "I don't know his family. But I can take care of it." He shook his head and continued. "He himself, you see, I can't say I know him. But still have to help each other." While walking in the corridor, Rio involuntarily looked into the nooks and crannies and asked Gran in the neighborhood if the rat had disappeared. He doesn't know anything. It was true that people talked about rats, but he paid little attention to public opinion in the street. "I have other concerns," he said. Ryu broke up with him. He hurried to visit the old man at the gate before writing to his wife. The children selling the afternoon newspapers advertised that the rat problem had been stopped. But Rio saw the sick man half lying out of bed, one hand on his stomach, the other around his neck, vomiting and retching into a garbage can, a kind of bile. Trying until he was out of breath, the old man at the gate finally lay down. The temperature was up to 39, the lymph nodes in the neck and limbs were swollen, and there were 2 black dots on both sides of the ribs that were spreading wider and wider. Now the old man complains of pain in his internal organs. "It's so hot, that damn animal that burned me like fire." The black slime in his mouth made him stutter. He turned to Rio, eyes bulging with tears from the headache. The wife worriedly looked at the doctor who stood silently. "Doctor," she asked, "what is the disease?" "Could be anything. But nothing is for sure. From now until evening, fast and drink blood purifier. Have to drink a lot." Right at the time the old man was thirsty to the point of burning his throat. Arriving home, Rio phoned Riza, a colleague, one of the most reputable doctors in the city. "No," replied Riza, "I don't see anything special." No fever with local inflammation? Ah, yes, 2 cases, with very hot swollen lymph nodes. In an unusual way. Oh, Riza replied, the ordinary, you know. That night, the old janitor was delirious, and when the temperature reached 40, the old man cried out about rats. Rio tried to cause an abscess to agglomerate. Burned by turpentine, the old man howled. Ah, wretched animals. The nodes are getting bigger day by day, hard and rough to the touch. The old woman panicked. Please stay awake and watch the old man, said the doctor, and if necessary, call me. The next day, April 30th, the sky was blue and humid, and a warm wind began to blow, bringing with it the scent of flowers from the furthest suburbs. The early morning noise on the street seemed stronger and more cheerful than usual. In our little town, free from the fear that had smoldered during the past week, it was a new spring day. Rio himself, reassured when he received his wife's letter, went down to the old man's house at the gate, relieved. And indeed, this morning, the old man's temperature dropped to 38. The patient sat on the bed smiling, looking weak. Is the situation better, doctor? Asked the old woman. Well, just have to wait. But at noon, the fever suddenly reached 40 degrees. The patient continued to be delirious and vomited again. The lymph nodes in the neck were painful to the touch, and the old man wanted to find a way to turn his head away from his body. The wife sat at the foot of the bed, her hands on the floor, gently touching the patient's feet. She looked at Rio. This lady, said Rio, must isolate the old man and try to give him a special treatment. I called the hospital and we took the old man away by ambulance. 2 hours later, in the car, the doctor and the old woman looked down at the patient. The old man, whose mouth was covered with warts, mumbled incoherent words, mice. Pale skin, waxy lips, lead-colored eyelids, breath. Uneven and urgent, tormented by his lymph nodes, he curled up on the couch as if he wanted to fold it over his body, or as if something from the ground called him incessantly. The old man suffocated under an invisible weight. The wife sat crying. There's no hope, is there, doctor? He's gone, Rio replied. The death of the old gatekeeper marked, so to speak, the end of a period rife with surprising signs and the beginning of another, relatively more difficult, in which the amazement of the beginning turned into a real horror. Our compatriots never thought that this small city could be a particularly favorable place for rat relatives to die. Under the sun, and the gatekeepers perished from grotesque diseases. Now they see it clearly. In short, in this respect, they were mistaken and their thinking, in need of re-examination. If only the situation had stopped there, the habit would have made people forget. But our other compatriots, and not just the gatekeepers or the poor, had to follow in the footsteps of old Neeson. From there, people begin to fear and reflect. Before detailing these new events, however, the narrator finds it necessary to mention another eyewitness view of the period just described. John Taru, whom the reader encounters at the beginning of the story, arrived in Arang a few weeks ago and stayed in a large hotel in the center of the city. City center. On the surface, he lived quite comfortably with his income. But no one knew where he had come from and for what purpose he had come, though by and by he was no longer a stranger to the city. People see him in all public places. From the beginning of spring he was often seen on the beach. He used to swim with a distinct pleasure. Kind, always smiling, he seemed to be a friend to all ordinary pleasures, without becoming their slave. In fact, the only habit one could find in him was his regular encounters with Spanish musicians and choreographers residing in the city. Anyway, his notebooks are a kind of chronicle of these difficult times. But this is a very peculiar set of records that seem to conform to a pointless preconception. At first, it seemed that Taru looked down on everyone and everything, not taking anything for granted. In short, while everyone was bewildered, he was intently working as a historian of things that had no history. Of course one can complain about such prejudice and take it as a sign of a dry heart. But that is not to say that these notebooks cannot provide a chronicle of the period with a multitude of minor but still important details, and their grotesque nature does not permit. We overestimate this good character too soon. John Taru started taking notes as soon as he arrived in Orang. From the beginning, he was strangely content to come to a city so ugly in itself. He described in detail the 2 bronze lions in front of the town hall and made generous comments on the treeless situation. Mortar, for the lack of grace and absurd layout of the city. Taru also recorded conversations he overheard in the subway and on the street, without commenting further, except a little later, on conversations involving a certain Kang. Taru overheard 2 train ticket collectors exchange. "Do you know Kang?" one person asked. Tension, tall man with a black mustache. "Yes, he's in charge of breaking notes." "Yes, that's right. But he's dead." "Ah, when did you die?" "After that rat thing." "Really? What's wrong with him?" "I don't know, I have a fever or something. Besides, he wasn't well. He had an abscess under his arm and couldn't stand it. But he looks like everyone else." "No, he has weak lungs, and he plays in the choir again. Always blow the piston, that is very harmful." "Ah, when you are sick, you should not blow the piston." After jotting down these narratives, Taru questions why Kang had joined the choir, against his most obvious interests, and for what deeper reasons had he given his life to the people of the choir. Such holy communion. Next, Taru seemed to be fascinated by a scene that often took place on the balcony opposite his window. Indeed, his room overlooked a small side street, where cats slept in the shadow of the walls. Every day, after lunch, while the whole city was dozing off in the heat, a small old man appeared on the balcony across the street. Silver-haired and carefully combed, with a dignified demeanor and a straight figure in military-style clothes, the old man called "Meow, meow," his voice high and gentle. The cats raised their sleepy eyes, but did not move. The old man tore up the paper curtains and threw them on the street. So attracted by the scattered pieces of paper like white butterflies, the cats stepped out into the middle of the road, hesitantly raising their paws towards the last pieces of paper. At that moment, the old man spat forcefully and accurately on the cats. Whenever he spits on the cat, he laughs. In the end, Taru proved genuinely interested in the mercantile character of the city, whose appearance, atmosphere, and even amusement seemed to be driven by commercial necessity. Taru applauds this unusualness. The word unusual is used by himself in the notebook, and furthermore ends one of his praises with the exclamation, "Is that so?" These are the only places where this traveler's notes, at the time, seemed personal. But it is difficult to assess their significance and seriousness. For example, after recounting that finding a dead rat caused the hotel cashier to miscalculate, Taru wrote further, with the usual unclear strokes, Q, how to save time. Answer, sense time throughout its length. How, waiting day after day in a dentist's lobby, in an uncomfortable chair, Sunday afternoon, must sit on the balcony, listen to conversations in a language they do not understand, choose the longest and most uncomfortable journeys by train, and of course yes, standing in line to get tickets to see theatrical performances and not getting tickets, etc. But as soon as such off-topic thoughts or words arise, the passages detail the tram in cities, describing their boat-like shape, faded colors, and familiar filthiness, and ending the remarks with a remarkable that explains nothing. Over.